on to the questions. I just would love to hear what you noticed this week in your own exploration of this. Stephen.
Okay, I'm unmuted. I've been noticing a while that I turn frustration into anger. And it's been showing up for quite a few years, and maybe my whole life, but I've been noticing it for quite a few years. And now I've been working with it, recognizing it, and I notice that I get frustrated when I'm on the phone with the customer service rep who's from the Philippines or Indonesia, and they speak with an accent. I started off just, shouting out anger in dealing with that. And I kind of changed over time in realizing that my anger is not serving anything. I mean, it's not helping at all.
No, it might actually be harming.
Yeah, because I was feeling dukkha. So I kind of changed.
And the people you're talking to might have been feeling it too.
Yeah. And the story goes that the way I morphed over time was that I stopped to tell the person, listen, I'm being angry right now. And my anger is caused by frustration. And the frustration is being caused by not understanding how, the words you're speaking. And, for the next conversation or, multiple ones later on, and I noticed that this service rep changed their speaking for a while and then slowly went back to their old style. And I integrated that into my dialogue and said, listen, I think it's human nature to go back to your normal way of speaking. So I get to support the person I'm talking to, and it relieves my frustration and anger while I'm doing that. And so it's really been a helpful change for me to do that. And
what's the change? Could you summarize that?
I find that I'm noticing being frustrated before the anger kicks in.
Okay.
And half the time I can let it go.
Okay, yes. You have a choice. When you notice it, there's a kind of a margin of choice to go in a different direction. You've discovered that. Yeah.
And I feel better because I'm recognizing it.
Yeah.
I feel better because I'm doing the practice. Yeah. And I'm slowly over time creating a new approach to being frustrated and angry.
Yeah.
And I feel pretty good about that.
Okay, great. So you're noticing the frustration and you're becoming a container that can handle the pain of that. There's a painful state of mind in you. And if you're not aware of it and you're not able to actually be with it, it has a way of taking over and magnifying, coming out in angry words and, so you're developing the capacity to notice it and to be with it. And even, as you said, let it go, that sometimes you can just back out of it. Don't have to go down that path at all because you have that capacity to notice it. The reason I'm kind of shining the light on it is because this is, one of the really important things here is to actually develop the capacity to be with something painful. You know, in your case, frustration, to actually be with the frustration, to actually notice it. And by be with it, I don't mean like become it, you know, and sometimes people mistake me. I just mean like get frustrated. I mean, actually notice that thing. And there's some kind of pain there in frustration for you. It's a particularly hard to handle experience. And I know this from personal experience. Frustration is a hard one for me too. There's something about just being there and tolerating not the communication not happening or something. Like it's easy to have things kind of build up. So just like to notice the pain of it. There's a painful feeling, mental feeling that comes with it. To be able to be with that and to just do that allows greater choice so that you can let it go, not go there, or keep it within bounds. Because when it takes over, there's a tendency. I mean, this is part of the toxicity of anger, is that anger tends to make us insensitive to the feelings of whoever we're talking to. It makes us feel kind of entitled in a certain way to go off on somebody. And this is true of everybody. I'm not talking about you personally. I'm talking to everybody here. There's something about that feeling of anger that the Buddhist psychology refers to it as shamelessness. There's a quality of shamelessness in it, where you act shamelessly in a way that could be harmful to someone else. You could say something that could hurt them, or even just your energy itself, even if you're not saying kind of nasty things, just your sheer kind of yelling or volume or something. It affects another nervous system, really does. So so the intention to actually stay with it inside yourself, it's a powerful one. It's a really wholesome one. And when frustration is kind of like the emotion that's hardest for you to do, it's got to be even more of a mindful bell. It's like the mindfulness bell goes off when frustration happens. It's just got to be there. Or it so easily takes over. All right. So thanks for asking that, Stephen. That it's just a very important thing to recognize.
Thanks for explaining it.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Keep noticing. Keep being with it. All right, I'm going to mute you unless you have something more to say here. And we're open to anybody else who'd like to hop in here. So JP, you've unmuted.
Yep. I'm finding over the practice period the recurring aversion I have to the term unwholesome and wholesome.
Mm-hmm.
And it's bringing me way back to unpleasant religious connections to that word, because it was very rarely used word around me, and it sounds so judgmental that I'm just getting to pleasant and unpleasant and neutral.
Mm-hmm.
And then to move beyond that, it sounds like, if I said someone else was unwholesome, I would be feeling judgmental. I know it's, there's an intellectual piece to it, but there's also an old emotional piece to me.
Yeah.
And so it feels just, it doesn't feel right, wholesome or unwholesome. And so I guess I'm just looking for another way to proceed,
Sure.
because I know this is a big thing in Buddhism.
It's a big
This
deal.
way.
Yes. Yeah, it's very much at the core. So it's curious that you bring this up because often I like using wholesome and unwholesome because it avoids good and bad.
Yeah,
And so when we're growing up, usually it's good boy, bad girl that is the conditioned words. And in I don't remember wholesome or unwholesome being used growing up in my Roman Catholic background. They were not words. So I don't have kind of historical conditioning around them. But if you do, feel free to change the words. You could use Pali, uh, akusala, kusala.
oh yeah,
Just use a foreign language. That's part of the advantage. Doesn't have a lot of the conditioning. Um, the other point that you make, I think, is I thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify this. So, the word judgmental to me implies that there's condemnation there. Like you're bad.
yeah,
That isn't actually the way that I'm using it. So I distinguish between judgment and discernment. Sometimes judgment means discernment, but I'm going to pretend like the words are really more separate than they are. Discernment is the process of seeing people being, skillful and unskillful actually is another translation of kusala, akusala. You'd be welcome to use that, skillful and unskillful. And that may avoid the moralism of wholesome for you. So let's say you see someone act unskillfully. What if there was no aversion in you toward them? No condemnation, but you just see unskillful behavior for unskillful behavior. You see this is, they're yelling at their child and the child is like, frozen and afraid and not hardly able to hear. And you just kind of recognize this, this is unskillful. This is not going to get the result that the person wants. And there's ignorance in there. And it's just the human condition. And we're all doing it. We're all doing things that are unskillful. Use that word for a while with you. We're all doing things that are unskillful that lead to suffering for ourselves and for others. And that's really kind of the root of unskillful. And there's a moral dimension to it because it is about suffering and not causing suffering. So there is a moral dimension to it, even the word skillful. But there's not aversion in it. There's not judgment, like you're morally bad. When you say skillful, I mean, that's perhaps the reason to choose it over wholesome. It just implies that you don't know something. You don't know a better way. There's ignorance there. And as a result of ignorance, a result of that cause, behavior results that's harming yourself and harming someone else. And you could maybe hear in my voice the neutrality of it, the neutrality of the discernment. It's like not bad person, but just seeing something as it is. Doesn't have to have aversion to it at all.
yeah,
The problem with being children and growing up in a religion is so much of this language is used as a means of control. The kind of moral language of good and bad. When you break down what good means in any parent's mouth, it generally means good means you're doing what I want you to do. Bad means you're not doing what I want you to do. It's about power. It's about manipulation. If I can be so kind of, once in a while, parents are really giving a moral education, but most of the time with young children, they're actually just trying to control them. And so that gets kind of baked into those words. And then religion steps in, and religion is often trying to do the same thing in terms of its sort of moral teachings. Is it's trying to control people, it's trying to make them do this and not that, and scare them out of doing this. And it has all this sort of complicated stuff. And even you'll find Buddhism, if I don't want to make Buddhism, how can I put this? If you go to Asia and you talk to people who are culturally Buddhists, they'll have some very similar kinds of experiences to people who are culturally Christian around, notions of being bad and good and hell and the whole thing. It's all in Buddhism too. There's this whole kind of cultural layer to it. But my understanding, really, in the deepest sense of the Dharma, is that one can discern what leads to suffering and what doesn't lead to suffering without condemning anybody. In fact, that's what's really freeing about it, is not condemning anybody, really seeing ignorance as the core of it all, not badness. People aren't bad because of badness in them. They behave in ways that are harmful because they don't know better. They're often traumatized by other people who don't know better, and so on down through the generations. So when that's seen, it's like your heart stays calm, your heart stays open, and when it doesn't, that should be like a mindfulness bell. When suddenly you find yourself like, oh, condemning of somebody for their behavior, you can kind of go, what's that touching in me? Where is that actually touching me that I should feel, kind of come out of discernment and start leaning towards judgment towards someone, that they're like bad or icky. There's this, this feeling of, toward them. That's a signal. That's a possible signal to look inside and see what that's touching. What is the pain that is touching that you're not able to actually be with in that circumstance? So how am I doing, JP? Did
I really appreciated a few weeks ago the separation of discernment and judgment, and I really was able to open to my own experience of leaving out the judgment piece. And tonight, when you said that the moral dimension of
skillfulness?
The unskillful, yeah. That it's like, yeah, I see. If it's harmful,
It's
of
harmful.
course, yeah. Then so that helps a lot.
It leads to harm, and harm leads to human beings being more and more uncivil to each other, and further down the road to harm, to where they start, killing each other. I mean, there's a progression there in terms of, as you can understand. So it's very important. Go through the week and just see if you can keep feeling that difference in tone between when you're discerning and when you're judging. It's really helpful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Stephen, you have your hand up. Want to hop back in?
I find that as time goes by, I'm integrating more of a perception of someone I'm with. I see them more and more. I see their humanity. And that seems to kick into, I don't know, you want to call it a reaction or a discernment, but it really is helpful. It's helpful to notice people's humanity, and I feel connected with a person that I recognize their humanity with. So I'm less apt to be angry with them.
Yes.
So, with that sales rep thing, and part of that integration was I actually now integrate. Uh, I explained to sales rep that I sometimes get angry. Uh, that's caused by frustration. Um, that's caused by not understanding your speech. And between going back and forth multiple times, I say to them, I think it's human nature to go back to your original speech pattern. And I make sure I say that to the person because I realize my anger might be hurting them.
Okay,
They
good.
might be reacting uncomfortably with my anger. So I don't want that to happen. They're my brother or sister. So um,
I think you're saying that essentially in recognizing people's humanity. You're
yeah,
recognizing that we're vulnerable. We're all vulnerable, and that softens the heart.
yeah.
Allison.
Okay. I've been, there's stuff personally that this is touching on, but I'm thinking it's sort of touching me in a way that there's a lot of discussions now about Israel and Gaza and Russia and Ukraine and who is evil and who is not evil. And I'm trying to sort of in a way bring these notions into that arena of nations, perhaps. And and I'm not, it's not clear, but I know I've sort of been being triggered in certain discussions where I am trying to hold a view of seeing people's humanity and judging actions maybe as horrific or wrong or as harmful versus the labeling of a whole people or a whole a whole state or a whole thing. And it's been really challenging, and when I'm thinking, you mentioned war and people killing people. Yeah, when it gets to that point when one has to sometimes, I don't personally, but make a judgment or take a side, take a position. It's really, really hard, of what is good, what is not good, what is harmful, what is not harmful, or what is better, what is skillful is it takes it into a different arena. And I think would be a great question. I think if a lot of leaders would ask, what will be the result of an action? Would it be skillful, whether it's righteous or not, But anyway, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I don't know that I even quite want to go there right now. It's very complicated. So see if I can do it just as simply as possible. I'll go to the good old teaching of the Buddha on right view. There's suffering and not suffering, This is suffering. It kind of cuts through a whole lot if you actually give your attention to suffering. And I see, of course, there's the suffering that we see happening in these countries that are at war, but there's also the suffering of the people here who in various ways identify with one group or another, and who also, are in communities of opinion, so it's complicated. So to simply, how can I put it? To find that feeling tone of not suffering in the midst of those conversations, in the midst of, and then to notice when there's suffering, notice when there's reactivity, notice when there's contraction, notice when there's blame. Watch these sorts of things go on and see when you kind of move out of the more open state of not suffering. In general, I think that there's a lot of not listening going on. There's a lot of not being able to stay in enough of an open state to listen to each other, the need to see it in a certain way. And so I just try personally to find that place myself and to recognize how hard it is to stay in that place it helps me be humble when I see other people having a hard time staying in a place of real openness and listening. All right, that's at least what I can say for now.
Appreciate that. 'Cause a
All
lot
right.
of times I just end up wanting to disengage but that's not quite what I want.
Engagement is different than actually staying open and not suffering in the midst of a conversation. Though that, even saying not suffering, sometimes the heart aching is suffering, but again, in my distinction of good grief, there's a certain kind of being willing to ache with people that I think is actually really helpful. All right, we're at our time for tonight. If you had questions you didn't get responses to, please come back and ask them again. So, so go out this week and just refine your view of the state you're in and what's, explore this skillfulness, unskillfulness with regard to your mental states. Okay, and then I think we'll be heading off in a little different direction next week, which I think will even deepen this topic more. All right, be well, everybody.